When my supervisor Mark told me I was being too detail-oriented about his budget calculations, I knew exactly what that meant. It meant he'd made a mistake, a big one, and instead of thanking me for catching it, he was going to make it my problem. I'd been at Meridian Financial for 8 years. 8 years of arriving early, staying late, and catching the kinds of errors that could sink quarterly reports. My cubicle sat in the corner of the accounting department, close enough to the executive offices that I could hear the important conversations, far enough away that people forgot I was listening. Mark had been promoted to senior finance manager 6 months earlier. His predecessor, Janet, had valued my attention to detail. She understood that in financial services, precision wasn't optional, but Mark came from sales. He understood relationships and revenue streams. He did not understand that a misplaced decimal point could cost millions. The error I'd found wasn't a decimal point. It was a fundamental miscalculation in our largest client's portfolio risk assessment. $3 million of exposure that somehow wasn't being factored into our reserve requirements. When I brought it to Mark's attention that Tuesday morning, he barely looked up from his coffee. His response was immediate and dismissive, too detail-oriented. Those were his exact words, as if accuracy was a character flaw, as if the meticulous verification that had prevented 3 previous regulatory violations was somehow excessive. I understood the subtext. Mark needed someone who would rubber stamp his work, not someone who would question it. Someone who would trust his judgment rather than verify his calculations. Someone who wouldn't notice when his confidence exceeded his competence. The thing about working in financial services for 8 years is that you develop instincts. You learn to recognize the patterns that precede problems. You understand that the executives who dismiss your concerns most loudly are often the ones who need your expertise most desperately. I also understood that Mark's dismissal wasn't really about me being too detail-oriented. It was about him being not detail-oriented enough. And in a business where details determine everything from client satisfaction to regulatory compliance, that was going to be a problem. So I began documenting everything. Every email Mark sent about the portfolio calculations, every meeting where he dismissed concerns about the risk assessment, every conversation where he prioritized presentation over precision. I created a comprehensive record of his decision-making process, including the specific instances where he'd chosen to ignore mathematical realities in favor of more optimistic projections. The documentation wasn't vindictive, it was practical. In financial services, when problems emerge, everyone looks for someone to blame. And the person who gets blamed is usually the one who can't prove they tried to prevent the problem. I'd seen this pattern before. 3 years earlier, another manager had made similar mistakes with a smaller client. When the regulatory review came, he'd blamed the accounting department for failing to flag the issues. The investigation revealed that we'd flagged them repeatedly, but he'd overruled our recommendations. He was terminated within a week. Mark's mistake was significantly larger, $3 million in unaccounted exposure across multiple investment vehicles. The kind of error that triggers comprehensive audits and regulatory investigations. The kind of error that results in executive terminations and department restructures. But Mark seemed confident that his approach would succeed. He'd convinced himself that his sales experience gave him insight into client behavior that traditional financial analysis couldn't capture. He believed that his relationship with the client eliminated the need for conservative risk calculations. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly verifying my calculations. I cross-referenced the portfolio data with market conditions, regulatory requirements, and historical performance metrics. I consulted with colleagues in other departments, framing my questions as hypothetical scenarios rather than specific client situations. Every analysis confirmed my original assessment. The $3 million exposure was real, significant, and completely unaccounted for in our current risk models. Mark's calculations weren't just optimistic. They were mathematically impossible. The interesting thing about working in the corner cubicle is that you hear conversations that people don't realize you're hearing. 2 weeks after my initial conversation with Mark, I overheard him talking to another manager about the client's portfolio performance. He was taking credit for the improved quarterly numbers, attributing them to his sophisticated understanding of market dynamics. He wasn't mentioning the $3 million calculation error. He wasn't acknowledging that the improved numbers were based on incomplete data. He was presenting the results as if they represented genuine performance improvement rather than accounting oversights. That was when I realized Mark wasn't just dismissing my concerns. He was building a narrative around his success that depended on those concerns remaining unaddressed. My attention to detail wasn't just inconvenient for him, it was threatening to his professional advancement. I scheduled a meeting with our CFO, Patricia Chen, for the following Monday. Patricia had been with Meridian Financial for 15 years. She'd worked her way up from junior analyst to CFO through a combination of technical expertise and political intelligence. She understood both the mathematical requirements of financial management and the human dynamics of corporate leadership. More importantly, she understood the regulatory environment. She knew that financial institutions survive by maintaining the confidence of both clients and regulators. She knew that confidence depends on accuracy, and accuracy depends on people who care about details. When I walked into her office that Monday morning, I brought 3 things: my original analysis of the calculation error, my documentation of Mark's dismissal of my concerns, and a comprehensive breakdown of the potential consequences if the error remained unaddressed. Patricia listened without interrupting. She asked precise questions about my methodology, my data sources, and my confidence level in the analysis. She reviewed my documentation carefully, paying particular attention to the timeline of events and the specific language Mark had used in dismissing my concerns. Then she asked the question I'd been expecting: why I'd brought this directly to her rather than working through the normal chain of command. I explained that I'd attempted to work through the normal chain of command. I'd brought my concerns to Mark, who'd dismissed them as excessive attention to detail. I'd offered to collaborate on revised calculations, which he'd declined. I'd suggested involving additional team members in the review process, which he'd rejected. Patricia nodded slowly. She understood the implications. Mark wasn't just making calculation errors. He was creating a management environment where those errors couldn't be corrected through normal processes. She asked me to leave the documentation with her and to continue my normal work responsibilities while she reviewed the situation. She also asked me not to discuss the matter with other team members pending her review. Standard procedure for potentially sensitive issues. I returned to my cubicle and waited. The next 3 days were interesting. Mark continued his normal routine, attending meetings, reviewing reports, and making decisions based on his flawed calculations. He seemed confident that his dismissal of my concerns had resolved the issue. He behaved as if mathematical reality was subject to management authority. On Thursday morning, Patricia requested a meeting with Mark. Then she requested a meeting with the entire accounting team. Then she requested a meeting with the executive leadership team. The sequence of meetings told me everything I needed to know about her conclusions. When Patricia met with the accounting team, she didn't mention specific individuals or specific errors. She talked about the importance of accurate financial reporting and the responsibility of all team members to raise concerns about potential problems. She emphasized that detail-oriented analysis was essential to our regulatory compliance and client service standards. She also announced that she would be implementing new procedures for portfolio risk assessment, including mandatory secondary reviews for all calculations involving client exposure above certain thresholds. The new procedures would require documentation of all assumptions and methodology, with specific protocols for addressing disagreements between team members. The implications were clear. Someone had made significant calculation errors, someone had dismissed concerns about those errors, and someone was going to be held accountable for both the errors and the dismissal. On Friday afternoon, Mark was terminated. The termination was handled quietly and professionally. No dramatic confrontations, no public announcements, no detailed explanations. Mark simply wasn't there when I arrived Monday morning. His office was empty, his computer access had been revoked, and his responsibilities had been redistributed among other team members. Patricia called me into her office that afternoon. She thanked me for bringing the calculation error to her attention and for documenting the circumstances around Mark's response. She confirmed that my analysis had been accurate and that the error would have resulted in significant regulatory and financial consequences if left unaddressed. She also offered me Mark's position. The offer surprised me. I'd expected recognition for identifying the problem, possibly a commendation or a small bonus. I hadn't expected a promotion to management level. But Patricia explained her reasoning clearly. She needed someone in that position who understood the technical requirements of financial analysis. someone who wouldn't be intimidated by complex calculations or regulatory requirements, someone who would value precision over presentation and accuracy over expediency. She also needed someone who understood the importance of listening to concerns raised by team members, someone who would create an environment where problems could be identified and addressed through normal processes rather than requiring escalation to executive leadership. I accepted the position. The transition was remarkably smooth. The team members who'd worked with me for years understood my approach and supported my emphasis on accuracy. The clients who'd benefited from my careful analysis appreciated the continuity of service. The regulatory contacts who'd worked with our department valued the consistency of our reporting standards. Within 2 months, I'd implemented the new risk assessment procedures Patricia had outlined. The procedures weren't dramatically different from our existing practices, but they formalized the documentation requirements and created clear protocols for addressing disagreements. They also established regular review cycles that would prevent similar problems from developing unnoticed. The most significant change was cultural. Under Mark's leadership, questioning calculations or raising concerns about methodology had been discouraged. Under my leadership, those activities became standard practice. Team members were expected to verify their work, document their assumptions, and raise concerns about potential problems. The result was a dramatic improvement in accuracy and a significant reduction in regulatory queries. Our quarterly reports required fewer corrections, our client communications contained fewer errors, and our internal audits identified fewer compliance issues. 6 months after Mark's termination, Patricia included me in a presentation to the board of directors about departmental performance improvements. She highlighted the reduction in calculation errors, the improvement in regulatory compliance, and the enhancement of client service standards. She also mentioned, almost casually, that these improvements had been achieved primarily through better utilization of existing personnel rather than additional hiring or system upgrades. The implication was clear. We'd had the expertise to achieve these results all along. We just needed leadership that recognized and valued that expertise. The board members asked intelligent questions about our procedures and our results. They understood the financial implications of accurate reporting and the regulatory requirements of our industry. They appreciated the combination of technical competence and management effectiveness that had produced these improvements. One board member asked specifically about the cultural changes within the department. How had we created an environment where problems were identified and addressed proactively rather than reactively? How had we encouraged team members to raise concerns without creating excessive bureaucracy or slowing decision-making processes? I explained that the key was distinguishing between perfectionism and precision. Perfectionism seeks to eliminate all possible errors through exhaustive review and endless revision. Precision seeks to eliminate material errors through systematic verification and documented methodology. Perfectionism slows processes unnecessarily. Precision prevents problems efficiently. The board member nodded approvingly. He understood the distinction and its importance for both operational efficiency and regulatory compliance. After the presentation, Patricia and I discussed the department's future development. She was pleased with the improvements we'd achieved, but she wanted to ensure that our success was sustainable and scalable. She asked me to develop a comprehensive training program that would help other departments implement similar standards. The request represented a significant expansion of my responsibilities. Instead of managing one department's financial analysis, I would be helping to establish accuracy standards across the entire organization. Instead of preventing problems within my own area of expertise, I would be helping other managers develop the skills and procedures necessary to prevent problems within their areas of expertise. I accepted the additional responsibility enthusiastically. The training program took 3 months to develop and implement. I worked with managers from every department to identify the specific accuracy requirements of their functions and the particular risks associated with their decision-making processes. I helped them create documentation standards that would support their technical requirements without creating unnecessary administrative burden. The most challenging aspect was helping managers understand the difference between attention to detail and excessive perfectionism. Many managers had experience with employees who used accuracy concerns as excuses for avoiding decisions or delaying projects. They needed to understand that legitimate precision requirements were different from perfectionist tendencies. I emphasized that precision serves specific purposes: regulatory compliance, client satisfaction, operational efficiency, and risk management. Perfectionism serves emotional purposes: anxiety reduction, control maintenance, and criticism avoidance. Precision improves results. Perfectionism impedes results. The distinction resonated with most managers. They understood that their role was to support precision while discouraging perfectionism. They learned to recognize when accuracy concerns were legitimate and when they were excessive. They developed skills for addressing both types of concerns appropriately. 12 months after Mark's termination, our organization received recognition from the State Regulatory Commission for Excellence in Financial Reporting. The recognition specifically highlighted our proactive approach to error prevention and our comprehensive documentation standards. The recognition was significant because it came from external evaluators who had no relationship with our internal politics or personnel decisions. It represented objective validation of our approach and our results. Patricia invited me to accompany her to the recognition ceremony. During the reception, several other industry professionals asked about our procedures and our results. They were interested in understanding how we'd achieved such significant improvements in accuracy and compliance. I found myself explaining the same principles I'd learned through years of careful analysis and recent months of management experience. Success in financial services depends on maintaining standards that prevent problems rather than solving problems after they occur. Prevention requires systematic attention to detail, documented procedures, and cultural support for accuracy concerns. The industry professionals understood these principles intellectually, but they struggled with implementation challenges. How do you create cultural support for accuracy concerns without encouraging excessive perfectionism? How do you maintain efficiency while ensuring precision? How do you balance speed with thoroughness? I explained that the balance depends on understanding the specific accuracy requirements of each function and the particular risks associated with each decision. Not every calculation requires the same level of verification. Not every decision requires the same level of documentation. But every function requires clear standards for determining when additional precision is necessary. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. By the end, 3 other organizations had requested follow-up meetings to discuss consulting arrangements. They wanted help implementing similar standards within their own departments. Patricia encouraged me to accept the consulting opportunities. She believed that sharing our expertise with other organizations would enhance our industry reputation and create additional professional development opportunities for our team members. Over the following year, I worked with 5 other financial services organizations to implement accuracy standards similar to ours. Each organization had different technical requirements and different cultural challenges, but the fundamental principles remained consistent. Success required 3 elements: technical competence, procedural clarity, and cultural support. Technical competence meant understanding the specific accuracy requirements of each function. Procedural clarity meant creating documented standards for verification and review. Cultural support meant creating an environment where accuracy concerns were valued rather than dismissed. The most rewarding aspect of the consulting work was helping other professionals avoid the kind of dismissal I'd experienced with Mark. Many organizations had technically competent employees whose concerns were being ignored by managers who prioritized speed over precision. These employees often felt frustrated and undervalued, despite their significant contributions to organizational success. I helped these organizations recognize that technical competence was a valuable resource that required appropriate management support. Employees who identified problems weren't being difficult or perfectionist. They were performing essential functions that prevented larger problems from developing. The consulting work also helped me understand that my experience with Mark wasn't unique. Many organizations struggle with the tension between efficiency and accuracy. Many managers lack the technical background necessary to evaluate the legitimacy of accuracy concerns raised by their team members. This knowledge reinforced my appreciation for Patricia's leadership. She'd recognized that Mark's dismissal of my concerns represented a management failure, not an employee problem. She'd understood that accurate analysis was essential to our organizational success, regardless of whether it was convenient or comfortable. 2 years after Mark's termination, I received a promotion to Director of Financial Analysis. The promotion included responsibility for accuracy standards across all departments and direct reporting to Patricia. It also included a significant salary increase and equity participation in the organization's success. During my promotion announcement, Patricia made several comments that surprised me. She mentioned that my identification of the $3 million calculation error had been only the beginning of my contributions to organizational improvement. She highlighted my role in developing training programs, consulting with other organizations, and establishing industry recognition for our accuracy standards. She also mentioned that my approach to management had become a model for other departments. My emphasis on supporting technical competence while maintaining efficiency had produced results that other managers were trying to replicate. The promotion celebration was attended by team members from across the organization. Many of them mentioned specific instances where my attention to detail had prevented problems or improved results. They understood that precision wasn't about perfectionism or control. It was about preventing the kinds of problems that could damage client relationships, regulatory standing, and organizational reputation. Several team members also mentioned that they felt more confident raising concerns about potential problems because they knew those concerns would be evaluated fairly rather than dismissed automatically. They appreciated working in an environment where accuracy was valued and supported. The conversation reminded me of the cultural changes that had occurred since Mark's departure. Our organization had become a place where technical competence was recognized and rewarded, where accuracy concerns were addressed systematically rather than ignored, where attention to detail was understood as essential to success rather than excessive perfectionism. 3 years after Mark's termination, I received an invitation to speak at the National Financial Services Management Conference. The invitation was specifically related to my work on accuracy standards and cultural change in financial organizations. The speaking opportunity represented recognition from the broader industry that our approach had produced significant and sustainable results. It also provided an opportunity to share our experiences with a wider audience of financial services professionals. The presentation focused on the lessons I'd learned through my experience with Mark and my subsequent work in developing accuracy standards. I emphasized that technical competence and management effectiveness were complementary rather than competing priorities. Organizations could achieve both efficiency and precision through appropriate procedures and cultural support. I also discussed the importance of recognizing and addressing the dismissal of legitimate accuracy concerns. When managers dismiss technical expertise, they create environments where problems develop unnoticed until they become crises. When managers support technical expertise, they create environments where problems are prevented through systematic attention to detail. The audience response was overwhelmingly positive. Many attendees approached me afterward to discuss similar challenges within their own organizations. They appreciated the practical guidance and the specific examples of successful implementation. Several attendees mentioned that they'd experienced situations similar to mine with Mark. They'd identified significant problems only to have their concerns dismissed by managers who prioritized convenience over accuracy. They felt validated by my presentation and encouraged to continue raising concerns despite management resistance. The conference presentation led to additional consulting opportunities and speaking engagements. Over the following year, I worked with more than a dozen organizations to implement accuracy standards and cultural changes similar to ours. The consulting work confirmed that the patterns I'd experienced were widespread throughout the financial services industry. Many organizations struggled with managers who lacked the technical background necessary to evaluate accuracy concerns. Many technically competent employees felt undervalued and dismissed, but the consulting work also confirmed that these problems were solvable. Organizations that implemented appropriate procedures and cultural changes achieved significant improvements in accuracy, compliance, and employee satisfaction. The key was recognizing that technical competence was a valuable resource that required appropriate management support. 4 years after Mark's termination, Patricia announced her retirement. She'd decided to pursue other opportunities after 15 years of successful leadership at Meridian Financial. Her departure represented a significant transition for our organization. During her retirement announcement, Patricia made several comments about the changes our organization had experienced during her tenure. She mentioned that our reputation for accuracy and compliance had become a competitive advantage that distinguished us from other financial services providers. She also mentioned that our approach to supporting technical competence had become a model for other organizations. The training programs we'd developed and the consulting services we'd provided had enhanced our industry standing and created additional revenue opportunities. Patricia specifically credited the identification of Mark's calculation error as a turning point in our organizational development. She explained that the incident had highlighted the importance of cultural support for accuracy concerns and the need for management practices that valued technical expertise. She also announced that she'd recommended me as her successor. The recommendation surprised me, despite my growing responsibilities and industry recognition. I'd assumed that the board would recruit an external candidate with more extensive executive experience. But Patricia explained that the board valued continuity and internal development over external recruitment. She also explained that my technical background and management experience represented the combination of skills necessary for success in the current regulatory environment. Financial services organizations needed leaders who understood both the technical requirements of accurate analysis and the human dynamics of organizational change. The board confirmed Patricia's recommendation after a comprehensive evaluation process. They interviewed several external candidates and conducted extensive reference checks on my consulting work and industry recognition. They concluded that my combination of technical expertise and proven management effectiveness made me the optimal choice for continued organizational success. The promotion to CFO represented the culmination of a professional journey that had begun with Mark's dismissal of my concerns about his calculation error. What had started as a $3 million mistake had become an opportunity to develop expertise in accuracy standards, cultural change, and organizational leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark had criticized me for being too detail-oriented when I'd identified his calculation error, but that attention to detail had ultimately led to my promotion to the position he'd aspired to achieve. The characteristic he'd dismissed as excessive had become the foundation of my professional success. During my first board meeting as CFO, I presented a comprehensive review of our organizational development over the previous 4 years. I highlighted the improvements in accuracy, compliance, and employee satisfaction that had resulted from our emphasis on supporting technical competence. I also discussed the strategic advantages our reputation for precision had created. Clients increasingly chose our services because they valued our accuracy and reliability. Regulatory agencies viewed us as a model for industry best practices. Other organizations sought our consulting services to implement similar standards. The board members asked insightful questions about sustaining these advantages and continuing our organizational development. They understood that our success depended on maintaining the cultural changes we'd implemented while adapting to evolving industry requirements. I explained that our approach was designed to be sustainable and scalable. The procedures we'd developed were based on fundamental principles rather than specific technologies or personnel. The cultural changes we'd implemented were supported by systematic training and consistent reinforcement rather than individual personalities or temporary initiatives. The board approved my recommendations for continued development of our accuracy standards and expansion of our consulting services. They also approved additional investment in training programs and technology upgrades that would support our precision requirements. 5 years after Mark's termination, our organization received the Industry Excellence Award from the Financial Services Regulatory Commission. The award recognized our comprehensive approach to accuracy standards and our leadership in promoting best practices throughout the industry. The recognition represented validation of everything we'd accomplished since that Tuesday morning when Mark had dismissed my concerns about his calculation error. What had started as a $3 million mistake had become an industry-leading approach to organizational excellence. During the award ceremony, I reflected on the lessons learned through this experience. Technical competence is essential, but it requires appropriate management support to be effective. Accuracy concerns must be evaluated fairly rather than dismissed automatically. Attention to detail is a valuable resource that prevents problems rather than creating them. I also reflected on the importance of documentation and systematic response to professional challenges. When Mark had dismissed my concerns, I could have accepted his judgment or sought alternative employment. Instead, I'd chosen to document the situation and escalate through appropriate channels. That decision had required confidence in my technical analysis and faith in organizational leadership. It had also required the patience to allow proper procedures to address the situation rather than demanding immediate resolution. The results had exceeded my expectations. Not only had the calculation error been corrected, but the experience had led to comprehensive organizational improvements that benefited everyone involved. Our clients received more accurate service. Our employees worked in a more supportive environment. Our organization achieved industry recognition for excellence. Most importantly, the experience had demonstrated that organizations can change when presented with appropriate leadership and systematic approaches to improvement. The dismissal of technical expertise isn't inevitable. The undervaluing of accuracy concerns isn't permanent. Professional competence can be recognized and rewarded when supported by appropriate management practices. As I accepted the Industry Excellence Award, I thought about all the professionals who struggle with similar challenges. The technically competent employees whose concerns are dismissed by managers who prioritize convenience over accuracy. The detail-oriented analysts who are criticized for being too thorough. The precision-focused professionals who are undervalued by organizations that don't understand their contributions. I hoped that our experience would encourage these professionals to continue raising concerns despite management resistance. I hoped that our success would demonstrate that accuracy concerns are legitimate and valuable. I hoped that our approach would provide a model for other organizations seeking to support technical excellence while maintaining operational efficiency. The award ceremony concluded with a reception where industry professionals discussed the challenges and opportunities facing financial services organizations. Many conversations focused on the difficulty of maintaining accuracy standards while meeting efficiency requirements. I found myself explaining the same principles I'd learned through my experience with Mark and my subsequent work in organizational development. Success requires recognizing that accuracy and efficiency are complementary rather than competing priorities. Organizations can achieve both through appropriate procedures, cultural support, and leadership that values technical competence. The conversations reinforced my understanding that the problems I'd experienced weren't unique to my situation or my organization. Many professionals struggle with managers who dismiss their expertise. Many organizations fail to recognize the value of technical competence. Many industries prioritize speed over precision despite the long-term costs of inaccuracy. But the conversations also reinforced my confidence that these problems are solvable. Organizations that implement appropriate changes achieve significant improvements. Professionals who persist in raising legitimate concerns eventually receive recognition. Industries that support accuracy standards benefit from enhanced reputation and competitive advantages. 6 years after Mark's termination, I received an invitation to join the board of directors of the Financial Services Professional Association. The invitation represented recognition of my contributions to industry development and my expertise in organizational excellence. The board position provided opportunities to influence industry standards and support professional development across multiple organizations. It also provided access to emerging trends and evolving requirements that would help our organization maintain its competitive advantages. During my first board meeting, I presented a comprehensive overview of the organizational changes we'd implemented and the results we'd achieved. I emphasized that our success had been based on systematic approaches rather than individual personalities or temporary initiatives. I also discussed the importance of cultural change in supporting technical excellence. Organizations that dismiss accuracy concerns create environments where problems develop unnoticed. Organizations that support accuracy concerns create environments where problems are prevented through systematic attention to detail. The board members were particularly interested in our approach to training and development. They understood that technical competence requires ongoing education and support. They also understood that management effectiveness requires specific skills for evaluating and supporting technical expertise. I explained that our training programs were designed to address both technical competence and management effectiveness. We helped employees develop the skills necessary for accurate analysis. We also helped managers develop the skills necessary for supporting and evaluating technical expertise. The comprehensive approach had produced results that exceeded our expectations. Not only had our accuracy improved, but our efficiency had also improved. Employees who felt supported and valued were more productive and more engaged. Managers who understood technical requirements made better decisions and achieved better results. The board approved several initiatives based on our experience. They established industry-wide standards for accuracy requirements and management practices. They also created professional development programs that would help other organizations implement similar approaches. 7 years after Mark's termination, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the annual Financial Services Leadership Conference. The invitation represented recognition of my contributions to industry development and my expertise in organizational transformation. The keynote address provided an opportunity to share the complete story of our organizational journey. I discussed the initial challenge of Mark's dismissal of my accuracy concerns. I explained the systematic response that had led to his termination and my subsequent promotion. I detailed the comprehensive changes we'd implemented and the results we'd achieved. I also discussed the broader implications of our experience for the financial services industry. Organizations that dismiss technical expertise create unnecessary risks. Organizations that support technical expertise achieve competitive advantages. Industries that promote accuracy standards benefit from enhanced reputation and regulatory confidence. The audience response was extraordinary. Many attendees approached me afterward to discuss similar challenges within their own organizations. They appreciated the practical guidance and the specific examples of successful implementation. Several attendees mentioned that they'd experienced situations similar to mine with Mark. They'd identified significant problems, only to have their concerns dismissed by managers who prioritized convenience over accuracy. They felt encouraged by my presentation and motivated to continue raising concerns despite management resistance. The keynote address led to additional consulting opportunities and speaking engagements. Over the following year, I worked with more than 20 organizations to implement accuracy standards and cultural changes similar to ours. The consulting work confirmed that the patterns I'd experienced were widespread throughout multiple industries. Many organizations struggled with managers who lacked the technical background necessary to evaluate accuracy concerns. Many technically competent employees felt undervalued and dismissed. But the consulting work also confirmed that these problems were solvable through systematic approaches to organizational change. Organizations that implemented appropriate procedures and cultural changes achieved significant improvements in accuracy, compliance, and employee satisfaction. Today, 8 years after Mark told me I was too detail-oriented, I reflect on the professional journey that began with his dismissal of my concerns about his $3 million calculation error. What started as a management failure became an opportunity for organizational transformation. The experience taught me that technical competence is essential, but requires appropriate support to be effective. Accuracy concerns must be evaluated fairly rather than dismissed automatically. Attention to detail is a valuable resource that prevents problems rather than creating them. The experience also taught me that organizations can change when presented with appropriate leadership and systematic approaches to improvement. The dismissal of technical expertise isn't inevitable. The undervaluing of accuracy concerns isn't permanent. Professional competence can be recognized and rewarded when supported by appropriate management practices. Most importantly, the experience taught me that persistence in raising legitimate concerns eventually produces recognition and results. When Mark dismissed my concerns, I could have accepted his judgment or sought alternative employment. Instead, I chose to document the situation and escalate through appropriate channels. That decision required confidence in my technical analysis and faith in organizational leadership. It also required the patience to allow proper procedures to address the situation rather than demanding immediate resolution. The results exceeded my expectations. Not only was the calculation error corrected, but the experience led to comprehensive organizational improvements that benefited everyone involved. Our clients received more accurate service. Our employees worked in a more supportive environment. Our organization achieved industry recognition for excellence. The irony remains striking. Mark criticized me for being too detail-oriented when I identified his calculation error. But that attention to detail ultimately led to my promotion to the position he'd aspired to achieve. The characteristic he'd dismissed as excessive became the foundation of my professional success. Today, as Chief Financial Officer of an organization recognized for industry excellence, I understand that success in financial services depends on maintaining standards that prevent problems rather than solving problems after they occur. Prevention requires systematic attention to detail, documented procedures, and cultural support for accuracy concerns. I also understand that technical competence and management effectiveness are complementary rather than competing priorities. Organizations can achieve both efficiency and precision through appropriate procedures and cultural support. The $3 million calculation error that Mark dismissed as excessive attention to detail became the foundation of an industry-leading approach to organizational excellence. The concerns he criticized became the standards that other organizations seek to implement. Sometimes being too detail-oriented is exactly what the situation requires. Sometimes the characteristics that seem excessive are precisely what prevent problems from becoming crises. Sometimes the professionals who are dismissed for being too thorough are the ones who save organizations from significant consequences. The key is recognizing that technical competence is a valuable resource that requires appropriate management support. When that support is provided, accuracy concerns become competitive advantages. When that support is withheld, accuracy concerns become sources of frustration and missed opportunities. Mark's dismissal of my concerns about his calculation error represented a management failure that created unnecessary risks for our organization. Patricia's support of my concerns represented management excellence that created competitive advantages for our organization. The difference between these approaches determined not only the resolution of a $3 million calculation error, but also the direction of our organizational development for the following 8 years. Today, I continue to be detail-oriented. I continue to raise concerns about potential problems. I continue to verify calculations and question assumptions. But I do so within an organizational environment that values these characteristics rather than dismissing them. The result is an organization that prevents problems rather than solving them, that achieves accuracy without sacrificing efficiency, and that recognizes technical competence as essential to success rather than excessive perfectionism. Sometimes the greatest professional vindication comes not from proving others wrong, but from demonstrating that being right requires the characteristics others dismiss as excessive. Sometimes the most satisfying career advancement comes not from defeating opponents, but from transforming organizations through systematic excellence. Mark's criticism of my attention to detail became the foundation of my professional success. His dismissal of my concerns became the catalyst for organizational transformation. His $3 million calculation error became the beginning of an industry-leading approach to accuracy standards. The characteristics he criticized as excessive became the standards that other organizations seek to implement. The concerns he dismissed as unnecessary became the procedures that prevent significant problems. The detail-oriented analysis he found inconvenient became the foundation of competitive advantages. Today, when I encounter professionals who struggle with managers who dismiss their expertise, I encourage them to persist in raising legitimate concerns. I remind them that technical competence is valuable even when it's not immediately recognized. I assure them that accuracy concerns are legitimate even when they're dismissed as excessive. I also encourage them to document their concerns and escalate through appropriate channels when necessary. Organizations that support technical excellence achieve better results than organizations that dismiss it. Professionals who persist in raising legitimate concerns eventually receive recognition and advancement. The journey from Mark's dismissal of my concerns to my current position as CFO demonstrates that technical competence, when supported by appropriate management practices, becomes a competitive advantage rather than an operational burden. Attention to detail, when valued rather than dismissed, prevents problems rather than creating them. Sometimes being told you're too detail-oriented is the highest compliment you can receive. Sometimes the characteristics that seem excessive are precisely what the situation requires. Sometimes the professionals who are criticized for being too thorough are the ones who achieve the greatest success. The $3 million calculation error that began this journey has become a $3 billion organization that leads its industry in accuracy standards and regulatory compliance. The detail-oriented analysis that Mark dismissed has become the foundation of an approach that other organizations seek to replicate. That transformation demonstrates the power of persistence, the value of technical competence, and the importance of organizational leadership that recognizes accuracy as essential to success rather than excessive perfectionism. Today, I remain detail-oriented. I remain committed to accuracy. I remain dedicated to preventing problems rather than solving them. But I do so as the leader of an organization that values these characteristics and benefits from the competitive advantages they create. The professional vindication is complete, but the commitment to excellence continues. The journey that began with Mark's dismissal of my concerns has become a career dedicated to demonstrating that technical competence, when appropriately supported, becomes the foundation of organizational success. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating opponents, but from proving that their criticisms were actually compliments. Sometimes the most satisfying achievements come not from personal advancement, but from organizational transformation. Sometimes the characteristics that seem excessive are precisely what create excellence. Mark's $3 million calculation error became the beginning of an 8-year journey that transformed not only my career, but also my organization and, ultimately, my industry. The attention to detail he criticized became the foundation of standards that other organizations seek to implement. The irony is complete. The vindication is thorough. The success is sustainable. And it all began with being told I was too detail-oriented when I found a $3 million calculation error. Today, I understand that being too detail-oriented is exactly what financial services requires. The characteristics that seem excessive are precisely what prevent problems from becoming crises. The professionals who are criticized for being too thorough are the ones who achieve the greatest success. The journey continues, but the lesson is clear. Sometimes the greatest professional vindication comes from demonstrating that the characteristics others dismiss as excessive are precisely what excellence requires.